Hello and welcome to today's impactful conversation with myself, Nejmi Alexander, and my wonderful co-host, Dr. Glenn Wallace. Glenn, how are you doing?
Really good, Nejmi. Thank you. Yeah, and as always, very much looking forward to this conversation.
I am on the edge of my seat for this one. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation as we're joined by our esteemed guest, Simon. Simon, I will give a couple of bullet points of introduction, but I would love to hear, of course, more of an introduction from you because I can't do it any justice in the same way that you could. So, Simon is a course leader in storytelling skills at Cambridge. You have published a series of books, including The Secrets of Storytelling. Hopefully, we'll unravel some of those secrets in the conversation today. And you're a broadcaster also for over 20 years. Simon, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. You've given me such a build-up. I'm starting to feel nervous.
No, I was joking with Glenn before. There's a sufficient degree of nerves here when we talk about communication to be in the presence of a communication expert such as yourself. Simon, please, if you could maybe give us a bit more of an introduction to yourself. In particular, I'm really curious as to what inspired you delving into this sort of path or career path and area of expertise when it comes to storytelling. What's brought you to this space?
Such a great question. Well, I'll tell you a brief story, if I may. I mean, the moral of this story is always listen to people who are wise beyond your years, with your experience, anything you can learn from them, because this goes back to when I was 14 and I wasn't a very good kid at school, to say the least. In fact, I was nothing but trouble. And yet there was one teacher, a wonderful English teacher called Mrs. Osler, and she was a real old hippie. It was all clanking beads and flowing colours and fashions and materials. And she taught English. And although I was not good at school, she was the one I loved, and English was the class I loved. But then one day she was doing her stuff with us, and then she set us some homework. It's like, oh, no, homework, that's bad enough. And then even worse, the homework was to write a story about my first love. So you can imagine, they're a 14-year-old lad, homework and love. Oh, it could hardly be worse. Terrible. Anyway, I loved Mrs. Osler, so I wrote this story, didn't think anything of it, handed it in. Then next week, we're back in Mrs. Osler's class, and she was absolutely waxing lyrical about the stories she'd had sent. She said they were beautiful. Some of them were so moving. She was quite theatrical. So wonderful. That was Mrs. Osler all over, partly why I loved her. And then she said, but there was one story, one amongst all of these, which touched my very soul. It filled me full of joy. I'm thinking, all right, who's this swot who's done this? It's bound to be Kerry. Kerry had like National Health Service glasses, or Rachel with a big brace on her teeth, one of the swots. So it was some surprise to me and indeed the rest of the class when Mrs. Osler says, "Stand up, Simon Hall." Like, oh, the only time I ever got asked to stand up was when I'd done something wrong. But here, apparently, I'd done something right. And she was saying, oh, it's a wonderful story, Simon, a beautiful story, so original, so creative. And I'm just wondering what I've done. And then she came up with the punchline. And she said, whereas the rest of you, all 30 of you, have written about boys and girls as your first love, Simon has written about music. And it was beautiful. It touched me, so original and all that sort of stuff. And two things from that. First of all, I started to wonder, well, what does that say about me as a person if I'm thinking music is my love rather than human beings? Well, let's gloss over that. But the other thing I think which is really important about that was I had no idea what to do with my life, no idea where to go, as so many people don't at that stage. Maybe that just planted the seed that writing stories, telling stories, using words could be my way. And wow, what a way. It took me to the BBC telling stories. It's brought me here to Cambridge telling stories. It's brought me to writing books telling stories. And it's brought me to this fundamental truth, what we're talking about today. Stories are so important for us as people, but as leaders. If you can be a storyteller as a leader, you can immediately connect with your people, influence and inspire them in ways that mere facts, statements, and statistics simply can't.
Okay.
A great demonstration right there of the very reason that we've been lucky enough to have you on the podcast right there.
Brilliant. And just so we can get aligned, Ben. So, as an executive or as a leader listening to this conversation, when do we get the opportunity to really tell stories in a leadership context, and what do we mean when we say that? How do we bring that to life and do that in practice?
I would say, when don't you have the opportunity? You think about your day. Some of your day will be big, high-powered meetings around a table with lots of people to talk to. Some of it will be one-to-one. Some of it will be walking through the canteen or the restaurant or the staff area and chatting to people. Stories are always the things that bring words, ideas, and visions to life. So around the boardroom table, you might tell a story. You might say, look, we really need to do this because it's important. Or you might say, I was talking to one of our clients the other day, and they just said to me, they're having this real problem. And I thought, wow, that's something we can really solve. And there's a business opportunity. So rather than just saying, I think this is interesting, you tell the story. The client you met, you're having a chat, this came up, you thought, we do this, we can do this. It's really interesting. So framing it in the form of a story. And equally, go to the other end. If you're just having a one-on-one, maybe you're having a chat with someone who's struggling in the office or wants to tap into you for some advice. One of the things I always talk about when people ask me for advice, how do you get on in life? I could say, well, it's all about hard work. And we'd all nod and say, oh, yeah, of course, it's all about hard work. But does that really make an impact on you? Does it stick with you? No, of course it doesn't. So I would say something like, well, let me tell you a brief story. And here is another of my brief stories, if you don't mind. When I first came to Cambridge, which was 8 years ago now, it's scary because it was a new town and I was trying to find my way. And I thought I had something which I could sell, a contribution I could make. So I started looking around where I might be able to speak, to teach, to help people. And so I was really excited when I got booked by one of the colleges, Pembroke College, which is one of our oldest colleges, to talk to their students about media skills. So I did a couple of weeks of preparation. I got what I thought was a good session together, and it was full of interesting information, a bit of interaction, a bit of entertainment as well. So I walked over to the college that evening. I remember it was an autumn evening, so lovely golden light, beautiful Cambridge College, historic place. And I was full of energy and excitement because this could be such a big moment in my new Cambridge life. And I got into the room and 3 students turned up, just 3. There were places for 75 and 3 turned up. And okay, they were lovely and it was worthwhile. But I walked away that evening with a really difficult feeling inside. And I started to think about why so few students had turned up. And of course, the problem with Cambridge is its great advantage as well. This place expects rightly excellence, all the hundreds of years of history, all the things that have been done and happened here. And I was nowhere near that standard. So I had a choice. I could fold and think this isn't going to work and I go off and do something else, or I could do what I did. And I started really studying communication, storytelling, public speaking, writing, watching the greats, thinking about why they were great, reading around the subject, adding my own thoughts, my own angles, my own experiences. And I started to build up my teaching from there. And then I noticed that more people were coming and I was being booked for more opportunities, and then more and more opportunities, not just in Cambridge, but elsewhere. And then the university asked me, a kid of a state school, my parents were newsagents, me to lead a course, create and lead a course for Cambridge. I would never have thought it possible. And from there, from that hard work, I have done pretty well, if you'd be kind enough to allude to. But here is the point. About a year ago, I was invited back to Pembroke College to talk this time about public speaking, which of course gives you a bit of a tingle of nerves inside because of that failure all those years ago. And as luck would have it, they put me in the same room as that time when 3 students turned up. And I got there half an hour early, because I always do. So there's 75 chairs laid out again. And I'm thinking, oh, it's going to happen to me again. No. But this time, the whole room was full. And I was told there was a waiting list for people to come along.
Amazing.
So I left their college that evening with a very different feeling. And that, of course, for me is the point. The point is, I could tell you guys, if you've got to do anything in life, you've got to work at it. And you go, yeah, of course, Simon. Yeah, cheers. But what will you remember? Will you remember the story or the statement? And that's where I take it back to leadership. Leadership. If you tell a story like that, people just listen. They absorb, they remember, and they act upon it. And that's the importance of storytelling.
Yeah, right. So now got about 1,000,001 questions, but I'm assuming as a good communicator, it's probably not a good idea to try and ask them all at the same time. So let me try the one that's uppermost for me. What I'm hearing, I think, is that you can improve the skills of communication through application. I'd love to ask you to what extent you think storytellers are, or at least compelling communicators are born or made, and if there's a bit of both, what that might look like. I would put myself very much in if I was ever going to be good at storytelling, it'll be made, because naturally that's not where my inclination would go when I'm trying to communicate. So I'd love to get a sense of where you are on that. For me, mostly, but our listeners as well.
Yeah, it's a very common feeling, Glenn. And so many people I've worked with, and they've said, well, I'm not really a storyteller. And I sort of giggle. And they say, well, why are you giggling? I said, well, tell me a story. Tell me about how you met your partner, or tell me about, the first time you made a breakthrough in your job, or something that happened. And they'll happily tell the story.
Right.
And they go, oh, yeah, I just told you a story, didn't I? Yes, because it's such a fundamental part of our lives. We forget we are naturally storytellers. And you think about human history. Why are stories so important to us? Well, it goes back to before books and printed materials and this newfangled thing called the internet, and certainly artificial intelligence. How did we hand around knowledge or wisdom around a community, around a tribe? How did we hand it down the years? Through storytelling. Storytelling classically around the campfire, with the elders telling stories. So we learn, we're interested, we're entertained, and we're educated from it. So it's instinctive in all of us. So we are all storytellers. Sometimes it just takes that, oh yeah, I am a storyteller. And then the wonderful thing about stories is they are so simple. The way you instinctively want to tell them is probably the best way to tell them, because that then engages, entertains, and educates the audience as well. So I will challenge you, Glenn. You will say, I'm not a storyteller. And then you'll go back after this and you think, oh, actually, I told this story the other day. And then that story, I am a storyteller. So yes, we are all storytellers. But yes, of course, you can polish the craft by practicing it. And there's lots of tricks, but you can do those tricks in a day. Frankly, I often teach or consult these things. And after a day, people are going away saying, oh, yeah, no problem. I tell stories all the time.
Well, I have to say it's quite a relief to hear you say that, and I've got another couple of questions to dig into on the back of that answer of yours, but I'll let Nejmi jump in, because he looks like he's got something on the tip of his tongue.
Well, I'm curious about the tricks. If I could share, there was a couple of things that really stood out to me, Simon, in your storytelling. And you can tell me if I've just made that up in my head or if that was intentional. And beyond that, if there are any other tips or tricks that you would share for anyone thinking about how to level up their storytelling. The first, of course, I think this is what you're alluding to when you said the natural way of telling a story is like chronological, right? This started and so, and so, and so, and so, and you kind of lead from one point to another. That was the second observation, but the and so seemed like a really useful bridge from point A to point B to point C. And then the other aspect was it felt very evocative. You were spending time in helping us to visualize, the people involved and, the brace of, the person X, and, really to visualize or feel like you're in the moment or in the story itself. Have I picked up on that correctly, or was there anything else that you would suggest for anyone wanting to pick up their storytelling?
You're an ace student already. I've passed you with the first. How about that? Yeah, you're spotted by tricks. No, you're absolutely right. So the easiest way, most obvious way to tell a story is chronologically. And if you're just starting off, I would suggest you do it that way because it feels safest and more comfortable. However, when you get more confident and you become more advanced level, you can switch the chronology around. And you think about some of the great stories, films. Let's look at films. Citizen Kane, the Orson Welles film, that starts at the end. Now, you don't normally start a story at the end, but he can do it because he's a master. And more up to date, the film The Usual Suspects. that also starts at the end and then goes back and reveals why the ending was what it was. So you can play with it. There's no set way to tell a story. But if you're starting off and you think, I want to try this, Lark, if you're inspired by our brilliant podcasters, let's face it, who won't be, clearly, audience, yes, please, yes, start chronologically, because that's the easiest, most straightforward way, and then start to experiment. And the other point you make about taking us into the story, that is the most common mistake I think people make with storytelling. They sort of gloss over it and they summarize things, maybe because they feel a bit awkward. And has storytelling really got a place in this board meeting, or what I'm trying to inspire this group of people? The answer is yes. But because you feel that pressure sometimes, you say, oh, and then this happened and it was the end. It doesn't work like that. You've got to draw them in, got to make them go, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? So a little bit of detail there in the middle. The final point I would add is that, yes, chronologically, but you've got to hook the audience to start with, because modern attention spans are so short and people are so easily distracted. You know, the smartphone's there. Oh, if you don't get them from the start, they'll be looking at their emails and their messages. So you've got to hook them. So, for example, if I'm telling a story about the imposter syndrome, which is one of my favorite stories, I won't start by telling the story. I'll start by saying, would anybody like to know how to beat the dreaded imposter syndrome? And everybody says, yeah, of course. Well, let me tell you a story about that. So you hook them in, and then you can go to the chronology and the narrative. But otherwise, yeah, I think you deserve an upper 2-1 to a first on that in terms of analysing my techniques.
I think the point you made about the adding the colour and the depth to the story, that when I was talking about the way I tend to trip myself up sometimes in communication is that I'll do the chronological process, but it ends up sounding, even inside my own head, like a shopping list, because I'm just recounting the elements rather than adding that depth in. And it brings me to another question that I think bridges maybe everything we've talked about so far. If I'm a busy leader going into a context where stories aren't typically told, how do I kind of start? How do I could I could envisage somebody rocking up to the board who are full of people who don't tell stories at all and starting with a florid narrative, and everyone going, what's happened to Glenn? He's obviously been on a course. So do you have advice for how people might both start it for themselves but also set some context, or at least begin to introduce the idea, particularly in environments where that's not so common?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's got to be relevant. You don't just want to start telling stories for no reason. And one of the things I do when I talk about my course for Cambridge and the external one, compelling communication skills, I could say to people, join the course, I'll make you a really good writer and public speaker and storyteller. But I don't. I will say something like, oh, by the way, last week, I got a message from Raj. He was on the course. He came because he was right about his public speaking skills, particularly with reference to the interview he had to go through for the top job in his organization. And he got in touch to say he got it. And what he was particularly pleased about, and he wanted to share with me, is that final interview, that awful hour-long interview, which I guess we all pretty much know, it had a 10-minute presentation in it. That was kind of the make or break moment. He said, I absolutely stormed it. And I would never have stormed it before the course. I used all the tricks we discussed. I could see the board, the panel were really impressed. And I pretty much knew I was going to get the job after that. It made my little heart glow.
Yeah.
So you can see the difference between me saying to you, come on the course, I'll teach you a load of stuff, or going into that brief story. And that story took, 30 seconds to tell. So when you make an important point, I always say, let's put it in the form of a story, because facts will fade, but stories will stick. Facts fade, stories stick. So if you can find a brief story to encapsulate your point, an observation, something you've been part of, something you've seen, something you've experienced, that will generally make your point land much more strongly than if you just come out with some facts.
Good point. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And what about the setting up of that in a context where one might consider the environment somewhat arid to storytelling as a mode of communicating?
I don't think you would ever find a more arid environment sometimes than Cambridge can be, because there is a great focus on data, and rightly so. We should have the data. But the data without the humanity is nothing. The data might be pointing us in this direction, but where is the humanity? I work with a lot of people who do medical technology here, so they're coming up with innovations which will help our health in the years to come. And they will often have loads of data about this being a fail point and we need to do this because so many people here are suffering with it. And they'll do a great presentation from that. But I'll say, here's the one thing that was missing. Where was the human element? And then we will take a case study from someone they've worked with, whether it's a patient or someone who's been on one of their trials, and say, well, Jack had this. And then through working with Jack on this, suddenly Jack went from being chair-bound to being able to play with his grandchildren in the garden. And even better, we then show a photo of Jack smiling with 2 grandchildren. And then the facts are there, but the feelings are there as well. And never forget, humans are emotional creatures. However much we try to be rational, you think of the number of times you've gone into something and you know logically it's wrong, but you've done it anyway because your feelings are taking you there. I won't test you on those ones because that's a nasty question to put you on the spot with. But everybody who's listening to this, and you two will think, oh yeah, there was that time when I knew it wasn't right, but I did it anyway.
You're really taking me into my past, into my career history here, Simon. So for the first half of my career as a strategy consultant, and most of my days were spent creating stories through data, but very heavily, just focusing on the data side of things, being very like objective, very quantitative. And actually, if I would have heard this, 15, 20 years ago, I would have taken a very different approach, because it feels like there's almost, to bring this to life, if you're making a presentation, there's the story that you want to tell in terms of the data or whatever the slides are meant to say. And then the actual story that you want to evoke on top of that, which is how do you bring that to life? What's the human connection that you can create with the data? Less evocative source of the story, like
it is the human touch. So for every data you're dealing with, there will be humans behind it, humans who are suffering with this, humans who are experiencing this, humans who are complaining about this. So by all means, show us the data, but then show us Jack or Jill or Joe or Jemima, and they told me how this felt, and they told me why they needed this, and they told me this impact on their life if we resolve this. So link it back. I always say when I'm teaching this, give me the facts by all means, but now give me the feelings. And I try to encourage people to go hand in hand. So I've delivered a fact, now give me a feeling. I've delivered a fact, now give me a feeling. Bring it back to the human all the way through, because the human is at the center of everything we do.
Yeah, and that's really timely. I think we've spoken with several clients just in the last quarter who, I think because of the macroeconomic kind of climate that we're in, are redoubling their efforts, I guess, to get close to clients. And so I think if you're a leader going into into an exec meeting or to the board, and you're trying to convince them to give you some, I don't know, further investment, let's say, then actually being able to tell stories about clients will resonate really well, even more so than I think it would have done traditionally. I think there's that element right now where doubling down on client stories or case studies would have extra power, even more so than it might have done previously. I don't know if you'd agree with that, and maybe you're getting some of that coming through the people on your program, Simon.
Yeah, I am, and there's been an interesting movement, I think, I've seen it the last year and a half, where I'm being asked to teach storytelling more and more often. And I've noticed jobs are coming up. Jobs are companies like chief storyteller or strategic storyteller or something like that. I think, oh, that's a good job. I quite fancy that. To remind myself I've already got a job. The storytelling, I think, is being appreciated much, much more than it was before. So I think your observation is spot on there.
Yeah, even more relevant then for listeners of this podcast if they're going into some of those contexts and struggling to think about how to tell and get. I think there's a difference between telling a story and having impact through the story that gets you the kind of change that you want or that gives you the influence that you're looking for. And that's, I guess, one of the keys to this is you're not saying ditch the fact. You're saying, yeah, have the facts and couple it with some story, and then you're kind of doubling its power, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to get all Cambridge and professorly on you, but if you go back, well, as it's you, because I know you can do it, and I know your audience can do it. Go back a couple of thousand years to the ancient Greeks, and where does this all come from? It comes from the ancient Greeks, and the three pillars of persuasion, the pillars of rhetoric, so your ethos, your logos, and your pathos. The ethos is your credibility. Why should I listen to you? Well, you've invited me here because I run this course at Cambridge, and I've written books, and I was with the BBC for years telling stories. That's my credibility. That's normally the smallest part of any pitch, presentation, any effort to persuade. And sometimes it's just implicit because you're the boss, so you've got the credibility. If you're the boss, there it is. You don't have to restate it. But the other two parts, the logos and the pathos, the logos, the logic, the pathos, the emotion, they're there and they go hand in hand in hand. But people often say to me, well, what proportion should I have of each? You don't know. That's the problem. There is no formula for that. If it's a scientific conference, you're probably majoring on the logos, but you would still have the human element to it. We're doing this because it's research into this disease or that problem. The pathos is the bit that people remember. So you need that emotion or that feeling, that connection, that humanity to it as well. So I'm absolutely with you. Don't ditch all the logic and the facts for the story, because otherwise people say, well, where's the detail behind that? But if you get the balance between the logic and the emotion, that's tending to take you in the right direction.
Brilliant. And are there any particular structures or patterns that you use or that you recommend for any, again, executives or leaders that are looking to bring that logos and pathos into their stories? Like how would they structure their delivery or think about that as a...
Yeah, so first of all, think about your audience. So who is the audience? If they are real data crunchers, then obviously you give them more data. If they're a more general audience, if you're doing a talk at a conference, and it's kind of a more fun and upbeat thing, but also you want to put your company or your organization or your work on the radar, that's more pathos, tell a few more stories. I did a talk a few weeks ago, which was an hour long, and they said, what slides are you going to use? I said, none. What are you going to say? I said, I'm going to tell some stories. And they're like, okay, have we got the right guy here? Is he okay to let on? And it went really, really well. And I didn't need any slides because I just told them the stories. So this is the impact of stories. I could tell you this, or I could tell this story, much as I've been doing with you. So stories are just just that way of making that connection. So always judge your audience. What do they need most of? But remember, if you've got ethos, logos, and pathos, you've got your credibility, you've got your emotion, and you've got your logic in there, then generally you've got a sound case.
Can I just jump on that theme, because it's a typically insightful question Nejmi's asked, and you've given a great answer. The question that's come up for me is, if I was prepping for a presentation, I'd probably, depending on the context, but let's say I was presenting a business case, I'd probably have learnt the facts. I might have some slides, but I would have learnt my story. To what extent, Simon, would you recommend leaders who want to step into this space more fully practice and rehearse? Because do I need some tools or something to hang my story on? How do I remember it? How much rehearsal should I do? That would be a really interesting thing. Having not that long ago given my daughter's father of the bride speech, I started rehearsing in October for a speech that happened in June. Yeah. So this is still quite fresh.
Oh God, Glenn. Well, I hope it went well. Did it go well?
Thankfully it did. Yeah, thankfully it did. But that's a story for another podcast, probably.
Yeah, indeed. I'm turning the tables on you. I cannot recommend highly enough practice, preparation, and practice. And again, little story insight from me. I could say to you, you're only going to succeed if you really prepare and practice hard. Well, I'll give you a brief insight. So last year I was invited to Copenhagen to go to a medical conference to talk about public speaking. And so we had the call, set up what was going on. And I said, of course, obvious question, how many people are likely to come to my session? And they said, we got 2,500 at the conference, but you're not core, you're satellite. So we normally get about 10% there because we think, yeah, quite a few people will be interested in public speaking, but you're not fundamental to the conference. So I said, oh, fine. I do that sort of audience in Cambridge quite a lot, no problem. And so I started to think about what I would put together. And then 2 weeks before the actual going out to Copenhagen, I got an email from the organizers saying, can we have a chat? And it's always going to be a difficult conversation there. Otherwise, they just put the information in the email, don't they? So I was wary. We went into this the next day. So I said, hi, we passed pleasantries. And I said, so how can I help you? Why do you need to have a chat? And they said, oh, right, we've had to change the room that you're doing the talk in. Oh, okay, that doesn't sound that major to me. Well, okay, fine. Why? Well, we've got indicative responses about who's likely to come to your session. Can you manage a few more than 250? I said, oh, of course, yeah. What are you talking about? 275, 300? How about 2,500? Right, okay. So I kept my game face on. No problem, that's fine. Ended the call. Did what English people do at any time of stress or crisis. Immediately made a cup of tea. And while I made the cup of tea, I started working on the talk for 2 weeks' time. And I put it together that afternoon. I refined it in the morning. Then I started to practice it. Did it twice a day for every single day up to the actual day itself. And then on the day itself, I think I rehearsed 4 or 5 times before I did it. And then it went really, really well. Brilliant. Fabulous. Thank you. But here's the punchline. Afterwards, that evening in the bar, I was speaking to some lovely pharmacists from Amsterdam. And one of them said, oh, it's great talk. How do you manage to make it look so effortless? And I said, well, that's the key. The more effortless a talk looks, the more effort has gone into it. Very good, Simon. I thought, great. So it goes back to what you said. If it's a big moment, you've got to practice and prepare well for it. But you don't want it to look like you practiced and prepared too well, and that's the balance.
Yeah. Good answer. Thank you. A quick one from me, Nejmi. Before it looks like you've got another one. If I might, just really, it's personal, but I hear it a lot from leaders. I'm an introvert. I don't like doing this kind of thing. Do you have a quick snapshot view for us on it? If you subscribe to the idea of introversion and extroversion, which I personally don't entirely, but lots of people do, what's your take on the difference in terms of personality preferences? And capability to do this, I think.
Oh, well, capabilities there. I mean, undoubtedly, everybody who listens to this will tell stories. They'll tell it's their family, their friends, even at work. So it's a human thing. The capability is there. The problem is realizing it's there and believing in it. And that's where the other part comes in, like introvert, extrovert. I get that. First of all, start small, practice. Start in a family group or start at work with just 1 or 2 people. Think, oh, that worked well. And then go up the confidence ladder. That can really, really help you. Right. And remember, when you're in a position of power and authority, you got to do stuff that you don't always feel comfortable with. And if you think, wow, a story here would be exactly what we need to really inspire this group of people. I classically use storytelling to inspire people. Then that's what you got to do. That's the job. So essentially, I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but suck it up. It's a great tool. And you would be daft not to have it in your locker because it can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, I'm sure people are feeling inspired to suck it up, step out of what's comfortable, go and practice, and then deliver effortlessly. What other advice? So anybody that is feeling like, oh, actually, I'm going to go and put more practice into my storytelling today, tomorrow, next week. What was 1 or 2 other bits of advice for any listeners to take away and really go ahead and put that into practice?
Well, I've had a lovely time talking to you, so I will give you my top tip for storytelling. This is my absolute favorite. It's simple, but it is golden. Create a story bank. So in every situation I go into, I have a story bank in mind. And in my mind, there will be 6, 8, 10 stories I can tell. And they range from the entertaining ones, which are a lot from my BBC days when ridiculous things happen, to the insightful ones when I'm teaching a lesson like Copenhagen and the pharmacists and the importance of hard work, to the inspiring ones as well. Have those sort of categories in your mind. And then whenever the occasion calls for it, tell one of those stories. And whether it's at a social occasion, a dinner party or a date, whether it's a work occasion, whether you're at a conference and networking, if you've got a story to tell, you will always make a good impression because everybody loves the storyteller. Always remember that in life. Everybody loves the storyteller. Watch what happens the next time you go to a series of presentations. The moment the speaker says, in fact, let me tell you a story about that. Even if people are half on their phones, they'll put them aside. Ooh, story. It's a trigger. It's a real trigger for us. So remember the power of stories. Remember, everyone loves a storyteller. Get together a story bank. And here's the joy of this exercise. I'll leave you with this thought. I have done this many times with groups now. And a lot of the people say, well, I haven't got any stories to tell. And I'll say, right, 5 minutes, think about it. You could say, oh, then what's that? Well, yeah, there was that as well. And now the second part, your homework. When you get home, talk to your family, talk to your partner, talk to your friend. Say, do you ever remember me coming home one night and saying, oh, wow, guess what happened? And telling a story. And they will say, oh, yeah, I remember this. That. And you will say, I've forgotten those, but they were brilliant stories to tell in a professional or work context. And before long, you will have a bank of at least 8, 10, 12 stories. And you'll think, I can really use those in professional life. So there's your homework. I'm not mean. I don't set nasty homework. I'm just setting you the homework with think about your story bank, because everywhere you go, take your story bank with you and it will serve you well.
Love that. Love that. Absolutely. Golden. Simon, what an absolute pleasure. We were all looking forward to this conversation, and it's not failed to deliver in any sense. In fact, it's over-delivered. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to get a little bit of insight into your clearly extensive knowledge in this space, but also making it really practical for people, which is, very much what we're about, is helping leaders, often very busy leaders, take some real gems. And if there are leaders out there who want to genuinely up their game, I think, and be more impactful, which is after all, the title of the podcast, I think stories are definitely the way to go. I do recognize in myself it's not something I leverage as much as I could and should, and you've definitely inspired me to go away. I'm going to think about my story banks, because I think having a few of those up my sleeve would be a good thing. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you so much for taking the time. It's been brilliant.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers. Until the next one, everybody. Thanks, Nejmi. I'll see you on the next one.
All the best.
Cool. Take care, everyone.
Bye.